Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today.
Yeah.
We had that conversation between Ahmed and Emma about, making friends in a new country and specifically how Ahmed's accent is making it harder for him to connect with people.
Yeah.
I mean, this is something anyone who's ever, been in a new culture can relate to.
Yeah.
And I think it brings up some really interesting stuff about communication,
Hmm.
belonging, and how accents play into all of that.
Oh, absolutely. It's like, that feeling of being an outsider, especially when you're dealing with language and cultural barriers. Like, Ahmed's situation really shows how much pressure there is to sound native, to be accepted. It's not always obvious, but it's definitely there.
Yeah, he talks about feeling self-conscious about his accent, like it's stopping him from making friends.
Right.
It's almost as if there's this like unspoken rule that you need a clear accent to fit in.
Exactly. And that can be so harmful.
Right.
It can make people afraid to speak or even ashamed of their native language and accent. But the thing is, accents are beautiful. They're part of who we are. They tell our story, our culture, our journey.
Wow, I never thought of it that way. But you're so right. Where acting like an accent means someone's not smart or capable, which is just not true at all.
Mm.
So if we're not trying to erase our accents, what should we be focusing on?
Clarity and confidence. Making sure people understand you being able to really express yourself, feeling good about using your voice no matter what your accent is.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm.
But how do you find that balance? How do you work on being clear without feeling like you're trying to change who you are?
Well, first you got to know the difference between accent reduction and accent adaptation. Accent reduction is about minimizing the accent completely, while accent adaptation focuses on being clear and understood.
So it's more like fine-tuning, not a total makeover.
Exactly. You're enhancing, not erasing. Think
Yeah.
of it like playing an instrument. You might adjust your technique a little to play different music,
Mm,
but you're not changing the instrument itself, just how you play it.
I like that analogy. So for someone like Ahmed, who's worried about his accent, what are some practical steps he could take?
The first step is to, recognize those core communication skills that go beyond accent. Clear articulation, good pacing, speaking at the right volume. Then he can pinpoint specific sounds that are tricky and work on those while still keeping the essence of his accent.
Emma mentioned language exchange meetups. Could that be a good starting point for Ahmed?
Absolutely. Language exchange meetups are great. They give you a safe space to practice real conversations, learn those everyday expressions, and build your confidence. But what's even better is that you're connecting with others going through the same thing. That shared experience of navigating a new culture can really bring people together.
Right, it takes the pressure off always worrying about grammar or finding the perfect word. You're just enjoying the experience together.
Exactly.
Emma also suggests that Ahmed should focus on hobbies and things he has in common with others as a way to connect. Do you think that could help him communicate better too?
It's like a fast track to connection, shared passions, break down barriers and get conversations going. It creates that common ground. When you're talking about something you love, the conversation just flows more naturally.
So it's not about language as a barrier anymore. It's about language as a tool for connection. He can relax, be himself, let his personality come through.
Exactly. And sometimes, a little accent can actually be an advantage. It can make you memorable, spark curiosity, even start a conversation.
I love that perspective. It's about owning your voice accent and all. But I'm guessing it's still a journey, right? Building that confidence takes time and effort.
Absolutely. It's a journey and there will be bumps along the way, but the important thing is to remember that communication is a two-way street. It's not just about how clearly we speak, but also how well we listen, how patient and understanding we are with others. It's so true. We often put so much pressure on ourselves to be perfect communicators that we forget that understanding goes both ways.
Mhm.
It's a back and forth. It's like a dance between speaking and listening. Both sides have to be really present.
I love that analogy. So
Hmm.
while working on clarity is important, we shouldn't get so caught up in it that we lose sight of the bigger picture. Connecting with others, on a human level.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Emma's advice to Ahmed about embracing the local culture, stepping out of his comfort zone, trying new things. It's about really immersing himself in the experience and opening himself up to new ways of thinking and being.
That's interesting. How does that connect to accent adaptation? I get how it builds confidence, but does it actually change the way someone speaks?
It totally can. Think about it. When you're immersed in a new culture, you're surrounded by the sounds, the rhythm, the little nuances of the language. You start picking up on the subtle things that make the language come alive, like intonation, stress patterns, even the way certain sounds are connected. It's like learning the music of the language, not just the words.
Oh, I see what you mean. It's like when you listen to a song over and over, you naturally start to pick up on the melody and rhythm, even if you don't really think about it.
Exactly. And the more you hear the sounds of the language, the more natural and effortless your own speech will become. You might even find that your accent changes a bit to reflect how people around you speak.
That's fascinating. So it's not just about practicing specific sounds by themselves.
Hmm.
It's about absorbing the overall flow and musicality of the language.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where you can communicate clearly and confidently while still holding on to the unique qualities of your own voice. And sometimes even small changes can make a big difference, like focusing on vowel and consonant sounds that are very different from your native language. That can really help with clarity.
Are there any specific techniques people can use to work on those sounds? I know Emma mentioned something about Ahmed's English being pretty good, but that it could sound more natural with practice. What kind of practice is she talking about?
There are quite a few effective techniques. One that's really helpful is shadowing native speakers. It's basically listening to a recording of a native speaker and trying to copy their pronunciation and intonation as closely as you can. It's like a vocal workout that helps you train your ears and your mouth to make those new sounds.
I can see how that would help. It's almost like a form of mimicry.
Mhm. But the focus is on clarity, not just copying someone's accent.
Right. It's about figuring out what specific elements of their speech make them clear, and then trying to use those in your own way of speaking. Another technique that can be really effective is recording yourself talking and then listening back to it critically. It helps you become aware of any habits or patterns that might be making it hard to understand you.
It's a great idea. I never thought about using recording for self-improvement. It's amazing how much we can learn by just listening to ourselves more carefully. It's a really powerful tool for self-awareness. And sometimes it's the little things that make the biggest difference, like paying attention to how you connect words together, how you stress certain syllables, or even how you pause between phrases. All of that can have a big impact on how clearly people understand you.
It sounds like there's a whole art to clear communication, a level of nuance that goes beyond just pronouncing words correctly.
You're absolutely right. It's a mix of linguistic knowledge, physical coordination, and self-awareness. But the good news is it's a skill you can learn and improve with practice. And the more you practice, the more confident and comfortable you'll become in expressing yourself no matter what your accent is.
That's really encouraging. So we've talked about the importance of clarity. We've explored some practical techniques for accent adaptation, and we've touched on how cultural immersion shapes how we speak. But I feel there's still more to discuss, especially about the emotional and psychological parts of adjusting to a new culture.
You're right. There's a whole other layer to this conversation. It's about building confidence, embracing what makes you unique, and finding that sense of belonging in a new place. Let's dive into that next.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of practical tips for improving clarity and adapting your accent. But what about the emotional side of things? Ahmed mentioned feeling like an outsider. And I imagine that feeling of not belonging can be a really tough thing to deal with.
Oh, absolutely. It can be incredibly isolating, especially when you're in a new environment. It affects your confidence, how much you're willing to speak up, even your self-worth. And for someone like Ahmed, who's already feeling insecure about his accent, that feeling of isolation can get even
Yeah,
worse.
it's like a vicious cycle, right? You're insecure about your accents, you don't talk as much, and then that makes you feel even more isolated and less confident. So how do you break out of that?
It starts with self-acceptance. Embracing your accent as a part of who you are, your background, your story. It's about changing your perspective from seeing it as a negative thing to seeing it as a unique and valuable part of your identity.
I love that. It's recognizing that our differences are what make us interesting, what make us human. But I bet that's easier said than done, especially when you're constantly hearing messages that tell you otherwise.
You're right, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
But there are things we can do to build that self-acceptance. One helpful thing is to change the way we think about accents. Instead of focusing on how different we sound, what if we focused on the similarities? The shared human desire to connect, to communicate.
Hmm. That's a powerful shift in perspective. It's about finding that common ground, regardless of our accents. And speaking of common ground, I'm thinking about Emma's advice to Ahmed about joining local clubs and groups. She specifically mentioned language exchange meetups, but I imagine any shared activity could have a similar effect.
Exactly. Whether it's a sports club, a book club, a volunteer group, or even just hanging out with friends, these shared activities give you a chance for genuine interaction. They take the pressure off the language itself and let you connect with people based on shared interests and experiences.
Right. It's like they say, a common interest is the best icebreaker. When you're doing something you enjoy, the conversation just flows more naturally. You're not focused on how you sound. You're more focused on the experience.
And as you build those connections, as you start to feel more at home in your new environment, that confidence naturally carries over into how you communicate. You'll be less self-conscious about your accent and more willing to embrace your own unique voice.
So it's a whole process. It's not just about practicing pronunciation or learning grammar rules. It's about building a sense of belonging, embracing your individuality, and finding your people.
Exactly. And this conversation has really got me thinking, how can we use our own unique voices and communication styles to build meaningful connections regardless of our accents? It's something for all of us to think about.
I agree. It's a great question to leave our listeners with. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to emphasize that learning a new language and adjusting to a new culture is an ongoing journey. There will be ups and downs, but that's all part of what makes life so rich. So embrace the journey, find your voice, and connect with the world in your own unique way.